welcome back to my channel, and today I finally got round to filming the final day of the Durst trial before they paused because of the coronavirus. I do have some news about that trial, but I'll tell you that at the end of this video. So, the first witness up is James McCormack, and he is Cathy's older brother. He was older by 7 years, and there was 5 of them altogether. Cathy was the youngest of the family, and her and James were close. They were a middle class, working class family, and Cathy was 14 when their father died. He says he first met Bob at a get together at one of their brother's house that he'd organised. It was just a guy's night, so Cathy wasn't there, and he thought Bob was intelligent but shy and didn't really engage in conversation, which is what a lot of people say about him. James had also said that Cathy was attracted to Bob's dry sense of humour, and James agreed that Bob had a dry sense of humour in the fact that if someone tripped over, Bob would laugh. Now, personally, yeah, I find that kind of stuff funny. If my husband tripped or, fell down a step or something, I find it hilarious, so I don't find anything wrong with that. But as we've heard, that Bob would cause someone to trip or fall for his own amusement, so there's kind of a bit of a difference. James had no issues with Bob at the time, and Bob got to know the rest of the family over time. James says when Bob interacted with his family that he was bordering on rude. So it sounds like Bob could be nice to start with, quiet but nice, and then all of a sudden they'd see a different side to him, and I think that kind of stuck in their head. Cathy would actually make excuses for him. He would come into the dining room and belch. I mean, who does that around other people's families in your own home? Fair enough, but just some more strange behaviour from Bob. Bob didn't buy a round of drinks when he was out with James and his brother, which again goes with him being stringent with money. He did witness on the odd occasion how Bob and his brother Doug were with each other. They would avoid each other and be at the opposite ends of the room. James says that their relationship came across as aloof and strained, but he never witnessed any violence. After this event, James noticed that Bob would be more curt and dismissive with Cathy. At a Christmas gathering, after dinner, they had cocktails and were sat on the couch. Bob had gone out to warm up the car because he wanted to go. We've heard this previous story, but this is from James's point of view. Cathy was sat having a drink with her family. Bob came back in and insisted Cathy got up, but she didn't want to. He got impatient, he walked out, came back in and grabbed Cathy by the top of her head and yanked her, and she went with the yank. So obviously just like that, which blows my mind that you would do that in front of your in-laws' family. Nobody stopped what was happening. As he says, it was so unexpected, they were all in shock. James's observation was that Bob knew exactly what he was doing. Why no one stepped in, I don't know, because I would have. Cathy indicated at times to James that they had issues, but not about the violence, even though James is aware of the violence now. He wasn't at the time. He thinks Cathy didn't tell him about what was exactly going on because she knew that James would have done something to Bob. Cathy spoke to her sisters and her mum more than she did James. James thinks Cathy had grown past Bob intellectually and emotionally. I agree with that. Bob never showed that he was proud of Cathy or told her he was proud of her. And James says Bob was controlling over everything. James says the month that Cathy went missing, she was excited about graduating medical school and wanted to be a paediatrician. As far as he knew, Cathy didn't take drugs. Now, this is a continuing theme throughout this trial about Cathy and her drug use. The last time James saw Cathy was over the Christmas holidays, in 1981, just before she went missing, Kathy was excited about the arrival of James's first child. James received a call from Bob to ask if he'd seen Kathy. Bob didn't say anything after that, and he didn't sound alarmed or concerned. And that's when James first became aware that Kathy may be missing. The next thing James knew, it was all over the newspapers and he was getting asked to do interviews. James started to call institutions and hospitals to try and find Kathy. James tried to call Bob a few times and would only get a dismissive response. James had put together a missing poster with the help of volunteer resources with a $15,000 reward. The money was put together by members of the family and friends, even though they didn't have much money. The last time James had contact with Bob was of March 1982, when Bob asked them to go get Kathy's stuff from the lake house. The only things that were there were a fishing pole, fishing net, and a pair of rubber boots. James did ask Bob where the rest of Kathy's stuff was, and Bob would answer, "I don't know." He was just really dismissive and cold. He'd obviously got rid of all Kathy's stuff. James had spoke to the original detective of the case, pleading for progress as he was getting frustrated that nothing was happening. James got mad because a few months later the detectives referred to Kathy's disappearance as a cold case. James blew up because his sister was missing and there were too many suspicious things going on. Which seems to... Bob is obviously a prime suspect. It blows my mind that this wasn't dealt with back then, and it never will be dealt with, because there's no evidence of proof that Bob did anything, and obviously he got away with one murder, so keeping my fingers crossed he doesn't get away with Susan's. James says Kathy would no way have just walked away from her life. Kathy was close with her mum. She would go to Kathy's room and cry. Kathy was her baby because she was the youngest. James says that there's no way Kathy would do this to her mum. Their mum passed away in 2016 at 102 years old, and he believes she never got over Kathy's disappearance. Kathy would never have missed her mum's funeral if she was alive. There is no doubt in his mind that Kathy is dead, and she died on the 31st of January 1982. The cross-examination, the defence attorney begins by picking fault with a missing poster James had made because it said Kathy was missing from the 1st of Feb and not the 31st of January. These bloody attorneys drive me insane. And listening to this last day, the frustration I felt for these guys was just unreal. He points out that the Durst had put up a $100,000 reward also. Big deal. Just because they put up more money, it means that Bob was more concerned about where Kathy was? No. Over the long period of time Kathy had been missing, James had put together his own timeline. The defence attorney is trying to get James to admit he gave the detectives any phone bills or phone records, but James keeps denying this. Like I've said before, it's such a long time ago. The witnesses are really struggling to remember things, which I totally understand. James did send a letter to the last detective that included phone records, but he doesn't really remember 100%. Then the defence is trying to make the witness out to be a liar because according to the phone records, the night Bob called James to ask if he'd seen Kathy, it was a 10-minute phone call and not as short as James had said. But James does point out that his wife did pick up the phone and spoke to Bob first. So that kind of mutes their argument. In the weeks following Kathy's disappearance, when James spoke to the detective, he would record the calls. He thought he'd given them to the FBI, but he had given to the makers of the jinx. James supplied information to help with the making of the movie All Good Things, like the family dynamics and events about Kathy, and then he was interviewed on camera for the jinx. James was not aware of any problems Kathy was having at medical school, although he was shown records. Sorry, it paused again. So, as I was saying, the defence asks James was not aware of any problems Kathy was having at medical school, although he was shown records that she had some interruptions, but she was on track with her grades. The defence asks if James is aware of Kathy taking cocaine. He was aware and he wasn't judgmental and wasn't concerned. It's possible that he told Kathy that she really shouldn't be using cocaine once or twice. There was a period of time when Bob and Kathy were happy. So, the redirect. The $100,000 reward put up by the Durst did go down to $15,000 within a couple of weeks. As James is now aware of Bob physically and emotionally abusing Kathy, he now knows that she was not living a good life. He is now being asked about Kathy's status and progress at medical school, as the prosecution have evidence, which is her registrar file. The prosecution is now asking James to read from Kathy's radiology clerkship from the 28th of December 1982 to the 24th of January 1982. Don't think that's right. I think I've got my dates wrong with that. Anyway, he reads, Ms. Durst is a very pleasant student who displayed keen interest in the subject, although she missed several sessions. She has a fair grasp of the background sciences and has sufficient clinical knowledge to be able to arrive at a logical conclusion. She is fairly quick at picking up radiological abnormalities and is a keen observer. She participates actively in group discussions and is eager to do a good job. So it sounds like she was doing rather well at medical school, even though she missed a few classes. This also has ratings, and her ratings are mostly very good. She was also planning on applying for a residential programme. The Dean's letter regarding this was very complimentary towards Kathy as a physician and was a recommendation for her to get a spot on residency. The recross, James doesn't know or remember if there was an illness in the family in July 1981, which is one of the excuses Kathy used when she wasn't able to finish the clerkship. Kathy had also told them that she had been ill, which James is also unaware of. Kathy had also withdrawn from the surgery clerkship due to personal reasons. James, again, is unaware. Like he said, Kathy didn't really speak to him about personal things like that, especially regarding her marriage to Bob. So I can't see why he would be aware of all that stuff. Redirect. In James's opinion, the reasons she gave were due to the physical abuse she was receiving from Robert. This is based on what he's heard since. So next witness is Dr. Marion Watlington. Marion is a medical doctor, but prior she was a registered nurse. Marion taught nursing students and Kathy was one of her students. She found Kathy delightful and was extremely bright. They both became friends and Marion became sort of a mentor to Kathy as they both wanted to become doctors. She was delightful, very intelligent and was head and shoulders above the other students. She easily grasped concepts, was alert and comfortable with the learning. She did very well. She was in contact with Kathy when she was applying for medical school. She says it's not true that Kathy only got into medical school because of her family connections. Marion is given a transcript of Kathy's grades. They are all A's and you can't get much higher than that. Kathy was motivated about going to medical school. Again, she was doing very well at medical school. Marion had met Robert and they all met up as couples. They went out to a restaurant together. Marion met Robert on 3 separate occasions in 1977. She says Robert just seemed very quiet and subdued, whereas Kathy was the opposite. He didn't converse with them very much. Fast forwarding to the end of 1981, Kathy had discussed her relationship with Robert with Marion. This would happen late at night when Kathy would call her. She says that when Kathy called, she was clearly upset and needed to talk. Kathy told her that she had been beaten up by her husband to the point where she had to go to the hospital, and pictures were taken to document her injuries. At this point, Marion was extremely worried for her, and Kathy had told her she wanted a divorce. Marion was worried that Kathy would be in further danger and could possibly lose her life, and she obviously told Kathy that. Kathy told her that she's going to leave him soon, but she's got to stay just a little bit longer because she wanted to get paperwork sorted out and to justify a proper settlement through divorce proceedings. So basically, she wanted what was owed to her when she eventually divorced Robert. Kathy did tell her that anything happen to her, to make sure the bastard doesn't get away with it. This is the first time Marion has ever said that statement in court. She did tell the police in New York when Kathy went missing. Obviously, they didn't take it seriously. She called the number on the flyers that were around the city, but the police never pursued it. Marion is 100% certain that Kathy would not give up on her dream to be a doctor. The last conversation she had with Kathy was in the last month before she disappeared, where she said, "Don't let the bastard get away with it." So, the cross-examination. Here we go. Marion wouldn't say Bob was socially awkward, maybe shy the first time she met him, but by the third time at a party at Bob and Kathy's house, he was a little bit more forthcoming, which the attorney points out that was probably because he was in his own surroundings. Marion never reported what was going on with Kathy before she went missing, and the attorney was blatantly trying to blame her for not reporting it, which is just bizarre when Kathy had given her reasons not to basically say anything. Marion did try and support her, but she never suggested counselling. Again, the attorney keeps going at her for this. On one of the late night phone calls, Marion could tell Kathy was drunk, and because she was going on and on and on. The attorney is trying to connect this with cocaine use, which is one of the signs of being high on cocaine. Marion is then questioned about a time when Kathy had told her that she was scared that Seymour Durst, which is Bob's dad, was going to kill her, suggesting paranoia on Kathy's part, again connected to cocaine use. The redirect, with regards to being asked about Robert being socially awkward, the attorney just plainly says, "Could this behaviour be consistent with him just being a jerk?" And Marion plainly just says, yes. Domestic abuse was seen when she was asked about why she didn't report the abuse going on. She explained that domestic abuse was viewed differently back then, and if a woman was to have reported that, it could have affected their career and it would not have been helpful. And she says any form of domestic violence back then was seen as the woman's fault. I'm glad times have changed since then. If that situation had happened now, Marion would have done more to get Kathy out of the home and out of the abuse. Marion had a lot going on herself. She had young children and she had her own career to think about. So all she could do was listen to her and support her. So the next witness is Virginia McKean. This is one of Kathy's sister. She says they were a regular family and a nice family. They lived in a nice house and they were happy. Kathy would come to visit and would enjoy spending time with them all. Kathy was close to her mother because she was the youngest and was classed as the baby. Virginia says Kathy was very intelligent and a very bright girl. She was fun to be with. She liked to do new things. She was adventurous. Kathy was very close to Virginia's kids. She loved to read and play with them. When Kathy married Robert, the visits eventually began to become less and less. When Kathy and Robert were married, Virginia says they seemed fine and happy and they all welcomed Bob into the family. Kathy was in love with Robert in the beginning, but gradually Kathy wanted to accomplish more, and Virginia says that seem to alter things. Although she didn't see them a lot together, what she did see the changes. Sorry about that. Her and Kathy still kept in touch when Kathy was busy at medical school. They wrote a lot of letters together. Obviously, there was no internet or anything back then, so, you know, they did write a lot of letters to each other, which I think is kind of sweet. The last time Virginia spoke to Kathy before she went missing was sometime in January 1982, a few weeks before she went missing. They were on the phone for about 3 hours. In this phone conversation, Kathy was mad and upset. She wanted out because she was so unhappy. Virginia was supporting her to leave, but she felt that Kathy was conflicted about leaving because she wanted to get what was due to her. The next witness is Officer Rashad Sharif, and on December 24th, 2000, we're going back to Susan Berman now. He got a call to go to Susan's home, and he was told it was an open door call. He arrived at 12:52 p.m. He met with another unit that was already there. They made a plan of how they were going to deal with the situation, just in case there was, you know, somebody already in there. They decided they would enter the residence from the rear, where the door was open. He had no idea, obviously, it would be a homicide scene, because a lot of these open door calls are because someone hasn't closed their door properly. This was the first open door he'd been to that turned into a crime scene. So they start going through evidence photos, and obviously because this is audio only, I can't see these photos. So I've made a note of the important photographs that they showed, because there was 40 of them. So the first photograph was showing the route they took, which was going down the side of the house, and the side gate was open. So obviously whoever went in and killed Susan went down the side and left the gate open. And then at the end they turned and saw the rear door was open. The rear door opened into the kitchen as they entered. They began the search of the house, and he says Susan's purse was in the kitchen. They then went into the living room, and off to the right was a bedroom, and that's where Susan was. He says there were bloody paw prints around Susan's body. They looked around the bedroom where Susan was found, and they saw a bullet casing. He can't remember if there was more than one. Then they looked towards the front door, and there was a note left under the front door. They did also, while searching, look for a suspect or any more victims. Obviously there were none, and there was no firearm found either. There was no obvious signs of a struggle or burglary. So that's the end of the Durst trial for now. While they've been off for the virus, there's been 2 mistrial hearings. Both mistrial hearings have been denials, and it has now been decided that the trial will not begin again until April next year. So that's it for the Durst trial until April next year. So until then, bye for now.